found this article for you. All of the evidences that Ham brought out in those videos. And are we rolling that? Okay, so this is an article from Answers in Genesis by that outline all the evidences that Ham brought out. Now, this article is written. If you look on there, this article is written by 4 different people. The first one is Dr. Andrew Snelling, which I don't have the internet on, but I'll tell you, Dr. Andrew Snelling has a PhD in geology from the University of Sydney in Australia. The second one was David Minton. He has a PhD in PhD in molecular biology from Brown University. He was a medical doctor. Dr. Danny Faulkner was a PhD in astronomy from the University of Indiana. And then Dr. Georgia Purdom was a PhD in molecular biology from Ohio State. So those are the people who wrote this. So you have 4 scientists with degrees from secular universities, one of which is an Ivy League school, who wrote this, because you have a geologist, a biologist, an astronomer, and a molecular biologist who specializes in genetics who wrote this. So keep that in mind. But before we get into this, we need to remind ourselves that whenever it comes to evidence, especially evidence for creation in a younger earth, one thing we have to remember is that there are 93, almost 100 dating methods used to date the universe and date the earth. And 90% of them come to a young age. 90% of them. And these are some of those that come to a younger age. I'm going to pull out like 10 of them today. Okay, so these are some of them. But the ones that do not come out to a young age are your radiometric and radiocarbon dating that we talked about. Okay, radiometric and radiocarbon dating. And Chad, I'm sure you remember the 3 assumptions on how to break down that whole thing. So we'll go over that later, but those assumptions that bring those dating methods that bring out the longer ages are packed full of assumptions that aren't provable, and they skew the results. And we'll look at that at a later date. Probably we'll look at the results at all of the false results probably when we get into naturalism. We won't worry about that right now, because I want to try to finish this up and get into the cults and stuff. But this is just going in with the idea of refuting just your basic refutation of atheism and evolution for someone who you just meet on the street. Just have some quick answers, boom, 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 that you can go out without having to sit down and have a drawn out conversation. Because we'll get into the drawn out conversation later. But some of the evidence here. First of all, if you look up on the screen, the first evidence that they mark is this: very little sediment on the seafloor. So Ashley, here's how this works. We know that the seafloor, right here is your continent. All right, and right here is the seafloor, which is being subducted underneath the continent. We've all seen those diagrams in our textbooks, you know. And over time, their sediment gets deposited from erosion and from the death of some marine life like the shellfish and everything on the seafloor. And it piles up over time, little by little and by little. We lose some of it by that subduction. As the seafloor gets subducted underneath the continent, some of it gets scraped off. Some of it goes down into the Earth's inside. So we lose some of it. Well, look at what this this would have been written by Andrew Snelling. Look at what this article says here. If sediments have been accumulating on the seafloor for 3 billion years, which is the alleged age of the ocean, the seafloor should be choked with sediments many miles deep. It should be. Every year, water and wind erode about 20 billion tons of dirt and rock debris from the continent and deposit on the seafloor. 20 billion tons. Okay? Most of this material accumulates as loose sediments near the continents. Okay? Yet, the average thickness of all these sediments globally over the whole seafloor is not even 1,300 feet. So he's talking about the sediments right here next to the continent. Average, they're only 1,300 feet thick all over the world. Okay, but how thick should they be? Should be miles thick if the ocean's 3 billion years old. Okay, should be miles thick. So some sediment appears to be removed as tectonic plates slide slowly, an inch or two per year underneath the continent. An estimated 1 billion tons of sediments are removed this way each year. The net gain is thus 19 billion tons per year. At this rate, 1,300 feet of sediment would accumulate in less than 12 billion years, 12 million years, not billions of years. So, at the current rate, this should have been laid down in 12 million years, not the 3 billion that they say. Okay? So, really what it comes down to is this would have been laid down by the flood, and not the slow and gradual processes that they say. But the point is there isn't enough sediment, Chad, for the oceans to be as old as they say it is. There should be way, way, way more, even with the current rate of subduction and the removal of it. So that's in your plan. But does that make sense? There's just not enough. I mean, we have about, at this current rate, if you don't account for the flood, you got about 12 million years worth of sediment down there. If you don't account for the flood, way short of the 3 billion that they think should be down there. So keep that in mind. Does that make sense, though? Okay, so that's one way you can say, okay, it's not as young as you think it is. The second one, and there he even offers some rescuing devices for you, how evolutionists try to explain it away. You can read that on your own because he refutes their challenges to it, you know. So, but then you have bent rock layers. When you go to the Grand Canyon, and we went over this before, when you go to the Grand Canyon, you see all those rock layers laid down. And those rock layers continue, but all of a sudden they go whoop, 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 and whoop. They bend. There's no cracking in the bend, because whenever you take a solid rock and you try to bend it somehow, what happens? It'll just break. But these rocks aren't broken. They're bent straight up without any breaking, which shows you when they were bent, were they hard or were they soft? They would have been soft. Now, obviously, they say, well, heat and pressure makes them pliable like plastic and bend. But the thing is when Andrew Snelling and Whitmore from Cedarville University went, they took a sample from here, and they took a sample from here, they took a sample from here. And they looked under their microscope, and they all looked the same. But if heat and pressure would have bent them, this would have been metamorphic. You should have seen some changes that underwent whenever they bent, if heat and pressure did it. But they were all the same throughout the entire sample. It was all just still sandstone. And they said, see, that proves that it was soft, that all of it was soft when they were bent. Every bit of it was soft, which points to a flood, because here's the reason why. Think this through. According to evolution, this, and this should have all been laid down over millions of years. Like this should have been laid down over, what, 12 billion years? This should have been laid down, 12 million years. That should have been laid down like 7 million years, 10 million years, 14 million years. Well, it'd be really hard to keep all of that soft for that long in order to bend it, which shows you that they were laid down rapidly in succession, quickly, one after another, and they were all bent at the same time while they were still wet. A flood did it, not slow and gradual processes. And once we get into naturalism, we'll watch a video on that showing you the microscope and all the evidence and everything. It's fascinating, but it's really, really cool. So bent rock layers are a strong evidence that those things were not laid down over millions of years, but were laid down quickly in succession, one after another. One after another. Those are flood deposits, not slow and gradual deposits. So that's another thing that we want to look over. Okay? And not to mention, right here. Here is the Tapete sandstone, what I was talking about. Look at the size of the rock layer. What kind of natural process can lay down a rock layer that big? Local flood? There ain't nothing local about that. That's a continental size flood, especially where that's only half of the rock layer. The other half is over in Europe. We're only seeing the American side of it. The same exact rock layers over in Europe. You can find the equivalent to the Tapete sandstone in Israel. That's where Petra is. In Edom down there. It's the same rock layer. So once again, it's like there's nothing local about that, Chad. That's worldwide stuff there. Look at the size of that deposition. It is huge. And people say that was even if it was a one-time flood, because some evolutionists now say that multiple floods happen. What kind of catastrophe would cause a flood that big to move that much sediment across an entire continent several hundred feet thick? Nah. It was a global event for sure. Okay? Soft tissue and fossils. This is what was cool about this. Mary Schweitzer, she's an evolutionist. She was up in the Hell Creek Formation of Montana. She found the T-Rex bone. They cracked it open. There was still red blood cells and soft tissue in that T-Rex bone. And since then, they have found hundreds more. And this came from evolutionists. You can find this in like Scientific America. You can find this and stuff like that. And that baffled evolutionists because they were like, DNA and red blood cells break down well before 65 million years. That bone ain't that old. So soft tissue and fossils is a big deal. Real big deal. Faint sun paradox. What this is that the sun is okay, let me read it to you, make sure I get it right. Evidence now supports astronomers' belief that the sun's power comes from fusion of hydrogen into helium deep in the sun's core. But there is a huge problem. As hydrogen fuses, it should change the composition of the sun's core, gradually increasing the sun's temperature. If true, this means that the Earth was colder in the past. Okay? In fact, the Earth would have been below freezing 3.5 billion years ago when life evolved. So they said that because of fusion, the sun is getting brighter over time through fusion, and it's causing the sun to heat up, which implies 3.5 billion years ago it would have been cooler, too cold to support life. And that's the idea there. And he goes into some of the science there. And there's rescuing devices where they try to rescue it, of course. Magnetic decay. Magnetic decay is another one. Archaeological measurements show that the magnetic field was 40% stronger in AD 1000. Okay? And so the magnetic field of the Earth is getting weaker over time. And that's important because I heard from another scientist say that if the Earth was just 1 million years old, just 1 million, at this current rate of weakening of the magnetic field, if the Earth was just 1 million years old, the magnetic field would be so strong it would rip the iron out of your blood. So we got a problem there. And they try to rescue that by saying that you go through reversals and all kinds of other stuff. But the problem is the law of physics don't allow for that. He gets into that. It don't allow for it. Okay? Helium and radioactive rocks. We still find helium in like uranium and stuff like that, and it only lasts 100,000 years, so we shouldn't have any helium in any of that. And you can look at that if you want to. Carbon-14 in fossils, coal, and diamonds. The same is true for that. Carbon-14 decays very, very, very quick. In fact, it decays so quickly that if every single atom on Earth was made out of carbon-14, it would all decay in about 1 million years. Well, here's the thing. You only find carbon-14 in things that were once organic, such as plants and animals, like fossils, stuff like that. Well, they're digging up these fossils that are way down deep into the rock layers, way down here, when it's supposed to be millions of years old, and they're finding carbon-14 in them. They even found carbon-14 in diamonds, which are supposed to be billions of years old. Okay. If it's that old, why do we still have carbon-14 if it decays so quick? We shouldn't have any. As the article here says, it would all be gone within 1 million years. So that's a thing. Short-lived comets. As we know, a comet goes around the sun and it heats up and burns and it creates a tail. Physics only allows for a comet to be about 100,000 years old, because it loses its material over time. So no comet can be more than 100,000 years old. Why do we still have comets? Well, you might know this. What's the rescuing devices on why we still have comets?
The Oort cloud.
The Oort cloud. They say 55 million astronomical units away, there's this cloud that produces new comets and throws them into the solar system. And what this is let me show you this. What's an astronomical unit? An astronomical unit, here's the sun, here's the earth. An astronomical unit is the distance between the earth and the sun. They call it an AU. So the Oort cloud is supposedly 55 astronomical units away. That's well beyond Pluto, because I think Pluto's only like 33. So it's way, 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 way out there. Do you know the problem with the Oort cloud? The number one problem with the Oort cloud? The problem that shines light on the Oort cloud more than anything, they say way out here there's a cloud full of debris that shoots a new comet out every so often towards the sun. So that way it keeps on replenishing the universe with comets. And that's why we still have them today. What's the problem with this Oort cloud? The number one problem. It's 55 million astronomical units away. We don't have a telescope. Not even James Webb could see something like that. Voyager hasn't even reached that distance yet. Do you know the number one problem with the Oort cloud? No one's ever seen it. So yeah, the Oort cloud is their answer. But how much evidence do we have that the Oort cloud actually exists? In their minds, it has to exist because we have comets. But there's absolutely no observable evidence for it. Like none. It is the most arbitrary rescuing device you can ever think of because they believe in it with absolutely no data to back it up. You know, they just believe it has to be there because we have comets. Completely arbitrary, Chad. Completely. From top to bottom. Completely. And he mentions the Oort cloud right here. Okay? So, right here. Yet, there's no evidence for the supposed Oort cloud. So, just like the sediments on the seafloor, very little salt in the sea. It's the same principle. It's the same principle. Assuming that the sea started off with no salt in it, which probably isn't true, you could get to the through today's erosion. It'd only take about 42 million years to get the amount of salt that we have in the ocean right now. But the ocean's supposed to be 3 billion years old. See, so there's not enough salt in the ocean. It might be more than the 6,000 years old that the Bible teaches, but of course we got the flood. So that would have eroded all kinds of stuff into the ocean. So it's no big deal. And DNA in ancient bacteria. This is called the Lazarus bacteria. It's supposedly 250 million years old. And they found 250 million years old frozen up in some permafrost. And they were able to get the bacteria out of the DNA out of that Lazarus bacteria and bring the bacteria back to life. Number one, if I had an ancient bacteria strand frozen in some permafrost, I don't want to be bringing that stuff back to life. That sounds like a really good way to start a pandemic. But the point is they were able to do it, and it baffled scientists because they're like, DNA don't last that long, even in pristine conditions. They have tried to freeze DNA in laboratories, and it will still only last so long. It breaks down and degenerates. They're like, how are we finding DNA in bacteria that's supposedly 250 million years old? And the idea is it's not that old. That's the point. The Ice Age happened just over 4,000 years ago, according to the Bible. So that's when it was frozen. It's still a mystery of how it lasted that long. Because it shouldn't have lasted 4,000 years, but it has. But 250 million years? No. There's no way. There's no way. So these are the 10 evidences, Chad. So if you read that article and get those down, you'll have some answers. But let's go through each one of them, and let's get Chad on his little evolutionary hobby horse here and start explaining them away for me, Chad. Offer up rescuing devices. Why do we have so little sediment on the seafloor? There is no answer, isn't there? They'd have to dig pretty deep.
Well, there's some up there. Like, if you scroll down to them to see how he explains it why.
All right. Those who advocate on old Earth insist that the seafloor sediments must have accumulated at much a slower rate in the past. So they just say they accumulated slower in the past. Oh, but wait a minute. Isn't the present the key to the past? Oh, so you'll say that the process has changed when it suits you. Right? You mock us for saying that the flood sped up stuff in the past, but when the same philosophy suits you, you'll gladly say it slows down in the past because the evidence doesn't match your theory. So that's how you can answer that. It's like they're using uniformitarian, they're breaking their uniformitarianism. The fact that the slow and gradual processes have been the same over all of Earth history. It must have been slower in the past. See, so they just shot themselves in the foot there. You know? Because now, once they use that argument, you can flip it and say, well, my argument for the flood is now valid. Because the processes aren't always the same. They can change, can't they? See, but they only do it when it suits them. And that's the problem. So, but that's their number one, that's the number one rescuing devices that they'll use. It must have been slower in the past, but they break their own model, Heather. Okay. How about, and we already went over the bent rock layers, and this is the one you brought up, that heat and pressure makes them pliable. Are there any others? Because that's the main one. Are there any others that people could bring up to try to explain it away?
You know what? The
bent rock layers, because we've already covered the heat and pressure, but that one doesn't hold up as the evidence doesn't show any metamorphic activity. So are there any others?
Maybe the rock types. Maybe over time they were originally like bendy metamorphic, but then they changed to
Geology can't account for that. They would be reaching into some pretty deep blind faith there, because we never seen a rock go from sedimentary to metamorphic back to sedimentary. There's absolutely no process of nature that can do that. It doesn't even make sense.
Well, maybe it started out metamorphic and turned back into sedimentary.
There's no geologic process that can do that, though. It's blind faith. You're reaching a real deep down Alice's wonder hole here in order to pull that one out. So, you know, the rabbit hole here. So it's like anything else, you know. All right, so right there, and there's some pictures of the bent rock layers, guys. You can see that they literally, because if you extrapolated this back, they were even, and then they bend down and then straight up 90 degrees.
I think they have that at the Superstition Mountains.
They probably do, but the thing, there's no fracturing in between them. None. It's just a perfect bend. It's very fascinating, you know. All right. Now, Chad, another thing, the deposition over vast amounts of the U.S. continent, except for a global flood. How would you explain that? There's nothing local about that. You'd be a fool if you said that was local. There's nothing local about that. What modern process could that you see happening today could account for a Tapete sandstone, which is 4,000 feet deep, mind you, in places, 4,000 feet deep? How can you account for a 4,000 foot deep on average rock layer spanning that big? What kind of process today could do that? And more importantly, where did the sediment come from? Where was it ripped up from to be deposited? There is no answer. See, evolutionists just completely ignore that.
Well, what's the rescue device?
The rescuing device is what solution do the old Earth advocates suggest? Heat and pressure. Okay, but this is the Tapete sandstone's equivalents can be traced to okay. They don't even offer they have no answer to it. There is no answer to it. They just ignore that. Soft tissue and fossils. What's see, there's no rescuing devices to that either, because I've watched videos on that. They ignore that. They sweep that under the rug. They're like, no. Some of them even denied it. The earliest rescuing devices for soft tissue and muscles has said that it was caused by bacteria. That's what they said. It was caused by bacteria, just like when you leave, like if you work in a restaurant and you clean out a dishwasher that hasn't been cleaned in about 2 months. You know, the slimy pink biofilm that builds up on the front of it. That's what they say that the soft tissue in the bone was. that it looked like soft tissue and blood vessels, but it was actually that biofilm. But the problem is the lady who was an evolutionist, mind you, went and tested it, and there was collagen and other stuff mixed in with it, which shows you it was soft tissue. So it wasn't bacteria. Bacteria can't produce collagen. So it's collagen. Collagen is what your ears and your nose and stuff is made out of. So it was soft tissue. They have no problem. They have no problem with that. The faint sun paradox, their rescuing device for that is, over the years, scientists proposed several mechanisms to explain away this problem. These suggestions require changes in the Earth's atmosphere. For instance, more greenhouse gases early in the Earth's history would retain more heat, but this means that greenhouse gases had to decrease gradually to compensate for the brightening sun. So it's arbitrary, in other words. So if the sun was colder in the past, they say that there must have been more greenhouse gases on Earth. Well, fine. The sun gets hotter. Isn't it convenient that the greenhouse gases dissipate just enough to allow for life? We don't turn into Venus, right? We don't turn into the 800-degree hellscape that Venus is. It just so happens that miraculously, as the sun heats up, the greenhouse gases get thinner to allow for life. So convenient, right? So convenient. So it's arbitrary. The magnetic field, rescuing devices, they call it the dynamo. You could read that, but there's no physical law of physics that would allow a reversal in the magnetic field. Helium, they don't. They try to call it. They try to say it was contaminated, but the thing is you can't contaminate a diamond with helium. A diamond is the hardest substance on Earth, and we find it inside. That helium should have broken down, and that's the point. Carbon-14 in fossils. Rescuing device is again contamination. Well, if you have contamination, that renders the entire. If carbon-14 is going into the fossil, that renders the entire dating method untrustworthy. So just throw it out. Short-lived comets. We went over the Oort cloud. No evidence for it. Salt in the sea. Same thing with the sediments. Salt. It must have been less in the past. Okay. Well, you break your uniformitarianism. And DNA and ancient bacteria. They claim the old age is valid if the bacteria had longer generation times. Okay, but it says, let's see here. Oh, they say that it was contamination from modern bacteria. Lazarus isn't as old as it claims to be. So again, contamination. They love that. See, it suits them. They'll use our arguments when it suits them, and that's the point. But Chad, one thing I'm trying to show you is with all of these, there's ways to explain it away, but they're all arbitrary. And that's kind of what we got to look at. So why did I bring us through that? Because this is the only day, this is the last day of going over evidences and stuff. Why did we go over this? The point is it comes back down to the overarching argument. You have, once again, the two worldviews. You have man's word, which is the evolutionary theory, but then you have the Bible. But let's introduce a different word to describe the Bible, because this carries more weight.
God's word.
God's word, or better, call the Bible what it is. It's a history book. Put the idea of history into your opponent. Say, You either have man's opinion over what may have happened in the past, but you have God's eyewitness testimony that is a written history of what actually happened in the past. You can't test this. It's done. But since this is an eyewitness statement, you can test that to see, is it credible? Is there evidence to back it up? And you'll see, yes, there is evidence to back it up, to make it credible, to where you could trust that that history is true. While here, completely arbitrary. Completely. They just make it up and try to make the... And they're looking at evidence, and they're gradually creating a theory to try to fit the evidence that they see. But here's the thing, Chad. Even if they came up with a theory that explained everything perfect, everything, they had all of their ducks in a row, it was beautiful, explained everything perfect, does that prove what happened if you weren't there to observe it? No, it's still just a nice story that explains the evidence. What if this story they make up and this story both explain the evidence perfectly? How do you prove which one's right? I hate to tell you, Heather, but in a court of law, eyewitness testimony always takes precedence. Always. Because one of them is still arbitrary. The other one's based on a book written by someone who claims to have been there. And that's the point, Chad. One of them will always be arbitrary. The other one claims to be eyewitness testimony. Eyewitness testimony, rationally and legally, always takes precedence. It's always more trustworthy because it's not arbitrary. So remember that. That's the main crux, the two foundations. Arbitrary word of man of people who have rejected God's word and sit down and say, okay, how can we explain what we see apart from God? We don't want God. We're suppressing God. How can we re-explain this? Versus a Bible that claims to be God's eyewitness testimony telling you exactly what happened. One's certainly stronger than the other. That's our argument, guys. Both of them require faith, Chad. But one's certainly stronger than the other. And does that make sense to you at all? That the whole theory and the entire argument there, that one logically is definitely stronger than the other just because one is made up based on no observable evidence of the past, while the other one claims at least to be an eyewitness. So you can never prove that an eyewitness is telling the truth. Remember that. Not even a court. You can't prove that an eyewitness is telling the truth. You can only confirm that they're trustworthy. You can only give evidence that would suggest that they're telling the truth. That would show that they're telling the truth. But you can never prove it. Why? Because you weren't there. The only way that you could prove it today is if you had a video recorder actually recording what they said that they saw.
Well, even then, that can be edited.
CGI and everything else. So exactly. So even today, you can't prove it. So remember, everything's taken by faith, guys. Everything. It just comes down to, do you have a reason to believe it? And with Scripture, you do. So rewatch, as I get these on the net, rewatch these videos because that's how you argue with people. That's how you argue with people because it's really that, the argument's that easy. It's that easy. Once you fully internalize it and understand it, you're realizing, man, atheists really don't have a leg to stand on. Not really. They don't have a leg to stand on. So, but any questions on that, guys? All right, we got about 15 minutes. Witness to me, chat. We're gonna have fun now. We'll hit the blue button. I'm sitting here with my Mad Dog 2020.